What's going on, Guardians? TBL here, and we're back. Bungie has just concluded the second of their Curse of Osiris pre-launch live streams, this one titled New Ways to Play. And in this video, we're going to be covering basically everything that we learned from Bungie today. They went over quite a few things. They talked a bit about adventures, some of the new things we'll be facing there. We got to see the new public event. We got to see a bit more of the Infinite Forest and a few other things. Let's just go ahead and dive on into it. This time around, Deej is back with Dave Matthews and Bungie game director Dan Miller to talk new places to explore in the Curse of Osiris. Now, they started things out by teasing a new in-game reward system before diving straight into the largest public event in Destiny history. I do believe they titled it Bespoke. Now, this event was indeed kind of crazy. The event space itself is massive, and it generally centers around defeating Vex gatekeepers who will drop these charged keys that you use to shut down warp gates that are all over the battlefield. Now, the event itself is going to be multifaceted. There's 3 different phases to it. And it's going to send you through jump cannons to different spots where at first you're going to be taking down 4 warp gates, then another few warp gates before sending you back to a centralized area to face off against a giant Vex gate lord. You'll be shutting down these gates with items called Seize keys that drop from Vex gatekeepers. So you destroy the gatekeeper, which is a giant hydra. It'll drop a bunch of these keys, you pick one up, and then you'll have kind of a mechanic that's similar to the dunking mechanic that can be found in King's Fall and the old Rift game mode. You take that to the specified location, you dunk the key, and it shuts down the warp gate. And that'll generally be how you progress through the first few phases of this public event. Phase 1 is going to consist of 4 warp gates, Phase 2 will have 2 warp gates on a central island, and Phase 3 will pit you against the Gate Lord, whose defenses you'll have to lower using the same charges you've been picking up from the gatekeepers. Overall, it was a crazy looking public event. There was plenty of enemies, a lot of action going on, and an absolute ton of major Vex enemies just all over the place. It looked like it was going to be a lot of fun to play, and I kind of can't wait to get in there and just jump around trying to get those keys and jumping in and out of combat. The world space there for it looked absolutely massive, and apparently parts of that world space are only going to be active, they're only going to be accessible when that public event is live. But anyways, completing that heroic public event grants you 2 chests worth of rewards, aka hashtag 2 tokens. I want to see nothing but 2 tokens in the chat there because it's a running theme and we'll come back to it later. After that, they moved over to the lighthouse and gave a quick glance to Brother Vance's inventory and missions. Brother Vance is going to have a lot of brand new stuff for you guys to engage in. During that part, we learned that most of Mercury is actually sealed off and that you'll mainly be exploring the planet via adventures. And some of these quests and adventures will require that you speak with Brother Vance, who provides a curious set of brand new items called Lost Prophecies. These Lost Prophecies have riddle-like verses and collection-based objectives tied to them. To complete them, you'll need to play through various activities like PvP, public events, adventures, or strikes, collecting rare items along the way. Each of these verses will tell you exactly where you can pick up this item. And thankfully, it's a pretty long list of activities that are viable for it. This is going to allow for players to have more than one avenue to complete a specific verse, allowing for more freedom of play. I really appreciate that. There's a lot of people out there who would prefer to just play PvP and still be able to get these rewards, and this allows for that. You know, of course, on the opposite end of the spectrum, there's people who prefer strikes, people who prefer adventures, people who prefer public events. And so thankfully, you'll have several different ways to get the items required to satisfy these verses. Anyways, once you've collected the items required, you'll use them in your inventory to apply them to a specific verse, and when that verse is completed, you'll be able to forge a brand new weapon. That's right, when the verse itself is complete, Vance will transmute it into a forge consumable, which you can take to the forge in the lighthouse to trade in for a specific weapon. This ties directly into the system we learned about last week, where they have that glyph wall with the 12 different spots. Well, 11 of those spots are going to be usable. This is going to be how you take those glyphs and forge the weapons that's tied to them. The example shown on screen was titled Verse 3, which rewarded the energy hand cannon Jack Queen King 5. This was a 150 RPM hand cannon that dropped at above 300 power. And while we didn't get a look at all of its perks, we did see that its big final perk auto-reloads a part of the magazine when the wielder is critically wounded. So a familiar perk, but definitely an interesting looking weapon. We know we'll be able to get 11 of those from the different verses that Brother Vance will have after we've completed the Curse of Osiris story. After that, they talked a bit more about the strike content we'll be getting with Curse of Osiris. Turns out we're getting 2 new strikes with the DLC, and 2 different versions of those strikes. They'll have a solo-friendly story version that's integrated with the story and the campaign of Curse of Osiris. You'll have to complete them in order to beat the campaign, and they'll have a more traditional fire team-oriented version of those strikes. Now that I thought was kind of interesting. I like the fact that they're going to have story versions of these strikes because it means you'll be able to play through them solo. I really appreciate that since it's something I kind of enjoyed doing whenever I was actually left alone in a strike in D1, and having a sort of different version of that strike that's more story oriented. They did say there's going to be a bit more lore and a bit more story focused stuff in the story versions of these strikes than there is in the normal version. I'm cool with that. I'm cool with being able to run through that on my own and just explore it. And of course they'll still have the normal fire team based version in the strike playlist and whatever else. Finally, they wrap things up by taking us on an adventure through the Infinite Forest, and we get a really good look at the environment and the enemies that can be found within. The adventure itself had them tracking down a fallen captain within the Vex simulation, but it also featured Hive, Vex, and regular fallen enemies, basically confirming that you'll be able to fight all of the enemy factions within the Infinite Forest. It's not just going to be completely Vex. And in addition to the enemies, we got a pretty good look at the structures that can be found within the Infinite Forest, including a brand new, kind of trippy looking jumping puzzle and the Dark Future, which is what I'm super excited about. The Dark Future is of course the simulation that the Vex put out for if they were to succeed in basically taking over. It takes place in the far future when the sun is already burned out, and for this particular adventure it was a simulation where the Vex figured out, well, what would the universe be like if we won but the fallen survived? And they basically confirmed on stream there's going to be many such sort of what-if scenarios that the Vex are exploring with the Infinite Forest. And I love that. I love the dichotomy between the present, the far future, and the far past, and the way it changes up Mercury's overall world space. I really can't wait to explore some of that. And of course, when it comes to the structure of the missions you'll be taking in the Infinite Forest, they confirm that somewhat random combinations of enemies and world set pieces are what you can look forward to in the Infinite Forest, but that there's always going to be a set structure to the missions that you take in there so that they don't become frustrating. Remember, replayability is the main focus of the Infinite Forest. They want you to be able to go in there, and every time you play a mission or an adventure in the forest, it'll be something different from what you've experienced before. But while that is the case, it is important to note that it is not procedurally generated, which Bungie of course has gone out of their way to explain several times over. Anyways, they played through the adventure, and at the end, of course, they came to their chest where they were rewarded with, that's right, hashtag 2 tokens, which again, I'll get into in just a second. Finally, they confirmed a few things. First and foremost was that heroic adventures are going to be a thing, complete with modifiers. And that is something I was incredibly excited to hear. Adventures are cool and all, but for the most part, I don't really run too many of them in the vanilla Destiny 2, as it were. You know, they're fine and all. It's nice bits of content with little bits of lore and story tied to them, but I just don't really find a need to run through them. And the addition of modifiers to kind of change up those experiences, that definitely piques my interest. So I was very happy to hear that they will be coming to adventures with the Curse of Osiris, and I'm very interested in seeing how that's going to basically change things up and make them crazy inside of the Infinite Forest. So that was pretty much it for Bungie's livestream. They finished things up by talking a bit about next week's livestream. They're going to be bringing on John Wisniewski to talk weapons, exotics, factions, raid layers, armors, all of that good stuff. We're going to be getting our fashion show next week, which I'm definitely looking forward to. Now, overall, if I had to be perfectly honest with this live stream, it was a little underwhelming. Definitely a little underwhelming. The hashtag 2 tokens thing is definitely right on the money. When I take a look at the content that's available in Curse of Osiris, it looks fun. I'm excited to play that public event. I'm excited to play through the adventures. I cannot wait to see the kinds of content that's going to be tied in with the Infinite Forest. And I love the Lost Prophecy system. That's super cool. It gives you something to chase. It gives you a reason to go into specific playlists. And it doesn't really require that you play a bunch of content that you don't like. If you're a PvP person, you can go play PvP to get the things that are required for the Lost Prophecy verses, and then you get those weapons and whatnot that are tied to those. I think all of that's cool. The problem with me isn't so much the content that we'll be playing as it is the rewards that we'll get from it. Oh man, I can't be the only person who, when Deej was talking about the public event in particular being the most rewarding public event in Destiny history, I can't be the only person who kind of did a double take when they opened those 2 treasure chests and out popped 2 tokens. That was basically the #1 point of contention on stream after then, and then of course, you know, moving on with the adventure, they got 2 tokens for that, and it really just kind of reaffirmed that you're going to be grinding for tokens to turn into a vendor for a chance at, you know, some of the rewards that you want, and I'm not exactly sure if that's really worth the time invested. Now, of course, I haven't played Curse of Osiris. We haven't had our chance to dive into that, so I'm not going to speculate too much here. But when they talk about making content that's worth your time, I don't know if those 2 tokens was it. And maybe, you know, this is an old build. Maybe, you know, you'll have a chance to get legendaries from those public events. I'm sure that's going to be a thing. I'm sure you'll have a chance at legendaries and exotics from completing adventures. But when it comes down to the base reward of getting tokens for completing that content, that doesn't really feel like time well spent. It doesn't really feel like, at least for me, a worthy reward for the time spent running some of that content. And I don't know, maybe I'm alone on that, maybe I'm not. I mean, who knows, maybe Brother Vance will be using those tokens for more than just faction level ups, or maybe he'll have a lower requirement for level ups. Maybe it won't take 20 tokens to level up with him, maybe it'll only take 10 or something to make those tokens feel like more significant of a reward. But based on what we saw in that live stream, it was a little underwhelming to me. You guys be sure to let me know what you all think down in the comment section below, because that is pretty much the end of this wrap up. Again, Bungie's final Curse of Osiris pre-launch livestream is going to be next week, and we will of course be covering everything that we learned from that as well. That's it for this one, guys. Thanks so much for watching, and as always, I'm TheBlackLink. You Guardians, stay frosty.